I worked the night shift at Westbrook Middle School for almost 6 years. It was just me and one other guy, Marcus, cleaning 30 classrooms, 2 cafeterias, and 3 gymnasiums between 11 at night and 7 in the morning. The pay was decent for the area, and I liked the quiet. No kids, no teachers, just the hum of the ventilation system and the occasional radio playing oldies from Marcus's cart. The school was built in 1972, one of those brutalist concrete structures with long fluorescent-lit hallways that seemed to stretch forever. The third floor was mostly storage and old science labs that hadn't been used since the 90s. That's where I usually started my shift, working my way down. Marcus stayed on the first floor because he had bad knees and didn't do stairs. For the first 3 years, nothing unusual happened. I mean, schools are creepy at night by default. Lockers look like tiny coffins. The empty cafeteria with all those stacked chairs feels like you're waiting for something to sit down. But it was manageable creepiness, the kind that fades after your first month. In October of my 4th year, I started noticing small things. I'd be vacuuming a classroom on the 3rd floor and hear what sounded like furniture moving in the room next door. I'd check, and everything would be exactly where I'd left it. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, heavy ones, like work boots on linoleum. I'd stick my head out, and the hallway would be empty for 50 feet in either direction. I told myself it was the building settling, or pipes, or maybe Marcus coming up to check on me even though he never did. It started in November. I was mopping the 3rd floor hallway around 2 in the morning. The school had this specific smell at night: floor wax, old lunch, and something metallic I could never identify. I was pushing the mop bucket past the old biology lab when I heard it. Someone whistling, "You are my sunshine." Not the whole song, just the first few notes, over and over. It sounded like it was coming from inside the lab. The door was locked. I had the master key, so I opened it. The lab was dark, except for the emergency exit sign casting red light on the rows of empty desks. The whistling stopped the moment I stepped inside. I checked the supply closet, the prep room, even looked under the demonstration table. Nothing. I went back to mopping, and 10 minutes later, it started again. Same song, same fragment, same room. I didn't check again. I just finished the hallway and went down to the 2nd floor early. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't want him to think I was losing it, and honestly, I wasn't sure I hadn't imagined it. But it kept happening. Not every night, but often enough. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always the 3rd floor. Sometimes whistling, sometimes footsteps, sometimes that sound of furniture scraping against tile when I knew I was alone. In December, I started finding things moved. I'd leave a trash can in a specific spot while I cleaned a classroom, and when I came out, it would be 20 feet down the hallway. One night, I left my coffee on a windowsill while I changed a light bulb. When I turned around, the cup was on the floor, upright, not spilled, just sitting there in the middle of the hallway like someone had carefully placed it down. I asked Marcus if he'd been playing pranks on me. He swore he hadn't been above the 1st floor in weeks. The worst night was in January. We had a 4-day weekend because of a teacher in service, so the building was completely empty from Thursday night until Monday morning. I took the Thursday shift alone. Marcus had requested it off for his daughter's birthday. I didn't mind. Overtime pay, and I figured without Marcus's radio playing, I might figure out where the sounds were coming from. I started on the 3rd floor as usual. Around 1:30, the lights in the east wing started flickering. Not all of them, just every 3rd fixture, creating this strobe effect down the hallway. I called it in to maintenance, but they said they couldn't get anyone out until morning and told me to just avoid that wing if it bothered me. I kept working. At 2 a.m. I'm certain of the time because I checked my phone immediately after. I heard a door slam somewhere on the floor. Not close, not far, just somewhere. The 3rd floor had 12 classroom doors, all of which I kept closed while I worked. I went to check them, walking the entire length of the hallway. All closed. All locked. I was heading back to my cart when I heard another sound. Running. Someone running toward me from the far end of the hallway, sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. I turned around and the hallway was empty, but the running kept getting closer. and then it stopped right behind me. I could feel breath on my neck. Warm, damp breath. I didn't turn around. I walked to the stairwell, went down 2 flights without stopping, and sat in my truck until Marcus showed up at 11 the next night. I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He just sat there for a minute, then said, "You ever notice how the 3rd floor cameras never work?" I hadn't. I didn't even know there were cameras on the 3rd floor. Marcus explained that there were supposed to be, installed back in 2015, but they'd never functioned properly. Maintenance had given up trying to fix them. "I heard," he said, not looking at me, "that a kid died up there. Back in the 80s. Fell down the elevator shaft before they sealed it up. They turned that space into a supply closet outside the old biology lab. I checked the next night. There was a supply closet outside the biology lab. I'd cleaned it 100 times, but I'd never noticed that the floor inside was different, newer tile, laid over where something had been filled in. I never went back to the 3rd floor. I told my supervisor I had developed a knee problem and needed to switch to 1st floor duties. He agreed, probably knowing I was lying but not caring enough to press it. I quit 6 months later. Not because of what happened, at least that's what I told myself. Better opportunity at a distribution center. But I still think about that breath on my neck. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd turned around. I got the job through my uncle. He'd been doing security for the school district for 15 years, mostly at the newer elementary schools, but he pulled some strings to get me into Lincoln High. It was a weird gig. Lincoln had been a regular public high school until 2009, when they built a new facility across town and converted the old building into administrative offices. The district kept the original structure, 3 stories, clock tower, the whole deal, but only used the 1st floor. The 2nd and 3rd floors were supposedly in transition, which meant they were full of old desks, filing cabinets, and decades of accumulated junk that nobody wanted to inventory. My shift ran from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., Tuesday through Saturday. There were 2 of us on duty at all times, me and a rotating partner. Most nights, it was a guy named Darnell, who was 62 and spent the entire shift watching movies on his tablet. We split the building. I took the 1st floor and the basement, which housed the old boiler room and some storage. Darnell took the exterior and the parking lot. Neither of us was supposed to go upstairs. That was the rule, posted on the bulletin board in the security office, floors 2-3 OFF limits. Alarm will sound. Do not enter. I assumed it was an insurance thing. The floors hadn't been maintained in years, probably full of asbestos or unstable flooring. I didn't question it. For the first 2 months, I did my rounds, checking that the exterior doors were locked, walking the 1st floor hallways every 2 hours, making coffee in the break room, trying not to fall asleep. It was boring in the way that security work usually is. Lots of footsteps in empty hallways, lots of checking locks that were always locked. The basement was different, though. It was huge, a maze of corridors that predated the rest of the building, probably from the 1940s when it was first constructed. The boiler room was modern, installed in the 90s, but the storage areas were ancient. Low ceilings, exposed pipes, lights that buzzed and flickered. My route took me through a corridor lined with old wooden doors, each labeled with room numbers that didn't correspond to anything upstairs. Room B14, B15, B15, B16. All locked. All empty, as far as I knew. In my 3rd month, I started hearing sounds from behind those doors. Not every night, but often enough that I began to dread that part of my rounds. It sounded like movement. Shuffling. Sometimes like someone dragging something heavy across concrete. I reported it to my supervisor, a guy named Kowalski who worked days. He told me it was probably rats, or water in the pipes, or the building settling. Old buildings make old sounds, he said. I wanted to believe him. The first time was a Tuesday. I was doing my 2 a.m. round, and the door to B17 was standing open about 6 inches. Just enough to see darkness inside. I was certain I'd checked it at midnight and found it locked. I called out, identifying myself as security, and pushed the door open with my flashlight. The room was empty, except for some collapsed cardboard boxes and a broken chair. The window was painted shut from the inside. No one could have gotten in or out. I closed the door, made sure it locked, and finished my round. It happened again 3 nights later. B12 this time. Then B19. Always between midnight and 3. Always the same. Doors slightly open, empty room, no explanation. I started taking photos with my phone, time-stamped, to prove I wasn't imagining it. Kowalski told me to stop bothering him about it unless I found evidence of an actual break-in. In my 5th month, I found something else. I was doing an early round, around 10 p.m., before Darnell settled in with his movies. I passed B14 and noticed something on the floor in front of the door. It was a piece of paper, folded in half. I picked it up and opened it. It was a detention slip, dated October 14, 2008. The student name was faded but legible, M. Torres. The reason for detention was unauthorized presence in restricted area. The teacher's signature was illegible. I kept it. I don't know why. I showed it to Darnell, and he shrugged. Probably been there for years, he said. Those rooms are full of old crap. But it wasn't full of old crap. I'd looked inside. It was empty. The night everything changed was in August. Darnell had called in sick, so I was working with a replacement, a young guy named Tyler who talked constantly about his plans to become a police officer. I did my first few rounds alone while he walked the perimeter. Around 1 in the morning, I was in the basement, approaching the corridor with the B rooms. I heard the sound again, that dragging, scraping noise, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Whispers. Multiple voices, too quiet to make out words, coming from behind B16. I should have called Tyler. I should have followed protocol and radioed for backup. Instead, I approached the door and pressed my ear against it. The whispers stopped. Then, clearly, a voice said, "He's listening." Another voice laughed, high and sharp like a teenager trying to suppress giggles in class. I stepped back, and the door handle turned from the inside. I ran. I didn't walk, didn't hurry. I ran full speed down the corridor, up the stairs, and didn't stop until I was in the security office with the door locked. Tyler found me there 20 minutes later, pale and shaking. I told him I thought I'd heard an intruder in the basement. He went down with his flashlight and his radio, and came back 10 minutes later saying everything was secure. All doors locked. No signs of entry. I put in my notice the next day. Kowalski tried to convince me to stay, said I was one of the better guards they'd had, asked if something had happened. I told him I got a better offer at a warehouse. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "You know, you're the 4th guard to quit this year." The others all said the same thing. Something about the basement. I asked him about the rule. Why we weren't allowed upstairs. He wouldn't look at me when he answered. "Same reason," he said. "Insurance. Structural concerns." Then he added, almost to himself, "And other things." I found out later, after I'd left, that Lincoln High had been closed in 2009 because of budget cuts, yes, but also because of an incident. A student had disappeared in 2008. Maria Torres. She'd been given detention for being in a restricted area, the basement, and had never come home. They searched the building for 3 days. Eventually, they decided she'd run away. Her family never believed it. Neither do I. Sometimes I think about going back. Not to work there, just to walk through that basement corridor one more time, to see if B16 is still locked. But I never do. Some doors are closed for a reason. The hospital had been built in stages over 60 years, so navigating it required a kind of institutional knowledge that wasn't written down anywhere. The oldest wing, where I worked, connected to the medical school through a skybridge on the 4th floor. During the day, students and residents used it constantly, shuttling between lectures and rounds. At night, it was supposed to be locked from both sides. My job was to make sure it stayed that way. I was the charge nurse for the night shift on 4 West, a medical surgical unit with 32 beds. We handled everything: post-op patients, chronic conditions, the occasional overflow from the ER when they got slammed. The shift ran from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and by 11, most patients were sleeping, most lights were dimmed, and the floor settled into that specific hospital rhythm: monitors beeping, IV pumps churning, the occasional call bell. I liked nights. Fewer administrators, fewer family members, just the work. The Skybridge was my responsibility because it fell within 4 West's zone. Every 2 hours, I was supposed to walk its length, about 100 feet of enclosed walkway with windows on both sides, and check that the doors at either end were secure. The hospital side had a keycard reader and a manual deadbolt. The medical school side just had a push-bar exit, alarmed, that could only be opened from the inside. In theory, no one could get through without setting off the alarm and alerting security. For the first year, the Skybridge was just a minor inconvenience. I'd walk it at 9, 11, 1, 3, and 5, flash my light at the locks, and head back. Sometimes I'd see the medical school lights on in the distance, students pulling all-nighters in the anatomy lab or study carols. Sometimes it was completely dark. Either way, it was quiet. Just my footsteps and the hum of the ventilation system. In my second year, things started to change. It began with sounds. I'd be walking the bridge at 3 in the morning, and I'd hear footsteps behind me. Not echoing footsteps. Distinct, separate, following my pace. I'd stop, and they'd stop. I'd walk faster, and they'd match me. The bridge was too narrow to turn around without being obvious, so I'd just keep going, telling myself it was my own footsteps bouncing off the glass, or the building settling, or some acoustic trick of the HVAC. Then I started seeing shapes in the medical school windows. The anatomy lab had these tall, narrow windows that faced the bridge, and at night, with the lights off, they should have been black rectangles. But sometimes they weren't. Sometimes I'd see movement inside, a silhouette passing in front of the glass, backlit by the emergency exit signs in the hallway beyond. I'd report it to security, and they'd check, and they'd find nothing. The anatomy lab was locked, alarmed, empty. Probably reflections, they'd tell me. Car lights from the street below. But the anatomy lab faced an interior courtyard. There were no streets. It started in winter. I was doing my 1 a.m. check, walking toward the medical school end of the bridge. It was cold that night, and the glass walls were fogged slightly around the edges. I was about halfway across when I noticed my breath wasn't the only thing clouding the air. There was another rhythm, another pattern of condensation appearing and fading on the glass beside me. I stopped walking. The other breathing stopped too. I started again, and it resumed, keeping perfect time with my steps. I didn't look to my left. I couldn't. I just walked to the end, checked the lock with shaking hands, and practically ran back to the hospital side. I told my supervisor, a day shift nurse manager named Patricia who had worked at the hospital for 20 years. She listened to my story without interrupting, then asked me to close her office door. "The Skybridge," she said, keeping her voice low, "was added in 1987. Before that, the medical school and hospital were separate buildings, but they needed to connect them because of what happened in '86. She wouldn't tell me what happened. She just said that ever since the bridge was built, night staff had reported unusual experiences. Footsteps, shapes in windows, breathing. "The administration knows," she said. "They've had studies done, brought in specialists. No one can explain it, so they just manage it, rotate staff frequently, discourage people from working nights too long in that unit." I asked why they didn't just close the bridge at night. "Seal it off." She looked at me like I'd suggested burning down the building. "They can't," she said. "It's required for fire code. 2 means of egress from every floor. If they close the bridge, they'd have to restructure the entire wing." She paused. "And honestly, I'm not sure it would help. Whatever's there, it's not confined to the bridge. That's just where people notice it." I stayed another 6 months. I needed the money. and I told myself I could handle it. I started wearing headphones during my bridge checks, playing music loud enough to drown out any footsteps. I stopped looking at the anatomy lab windows. I developed a system where I'd check the lock without breaking stride, not stopping, not giving whatever it was time to catch up. But it escalated. In March, I was doing my 3 a.m. round when I found the medical school door standing open. Not just unlocked open, the push bar depressed, the alarm silent. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, staring into the darkness of the anatomy lab hallway, waiting for the alarm to trigger, waiting for security to come. Nothing happened. I used my keycard to relock the hospital side, called security from the bridge phone, and reported a possible breach. They found the medical school side secure, the alarm armed, no signs of entry. The door had closed itself by the time they arrived. 2 weeks later, I was walking the bridge at 5 a.m., nearly at the end of my shift. The sky was starting to lighten, that gray pre-dawn that makes everything look flat and unreal. I was tired, looking forward to going home, not paying as much attention as I should have been. I reached the medical school end and found something on the floor. A piece of paper, folded small. I picked it up and opened it. It was a patient wristband, the kind we used on 4 West. The name was smudged, illegible, but the date was clear. 03, new 15. 1986. The medical record number was familiar. Too familiar. I'd entered it into the computer 100 times. It belonged to a patient who'd been on our floor for 3 months, a woman in her 60s with COPD. She was still alive, still a patient, sleeping in room 412 at that very moment. But this wristband was from 1986. It was yellowed with age, the plastic brittle, the adhesive dried out. I took it to Patricia the next day. She went pale when she saw it. She made me promise not to tell anyone, not to show it to anyone else. Then she told me the rest of the story. In March of 1986, a medical student had disappeared from the anatomy lab. He'd been working late, alone, which was against policy even then. They found his lab coat, his books, his coffee cup. They never found him. The investigation suggested he'd fallen into the body disposal chute, an old system that led to the incinerator in the hospital basement. But they never found remains, never found evidence. Just absence. The wristband, Patricia said, her voice barely audible. He was wearing it when he disappeared, not his own. He'd taken it from a patient. A joke, apparently, something the students did sometimes. The patient died that same night. Natural causes, but the timing haunted people. She looked at me. That patient was the grandmother of the woman in 4112. Same medical record number. Same name. We reuse them, you know. When someone dies, the number goes back into the pool after enough time passes. I put in my transfer request that afternoon. I moved to the cardiac unit on 2 East, no Skybridge, no history, no breathing in the dark. But I kept the wristband. I don't know why. It's in a box in my basement now, wrapped in plastic, buried under old tax returns. Sometimes I think about throwing it away. Sometimes I think about bringing it back to the bridge, leaving it where I found it, closing the loop. Mostly I try not to think about it at all. But on cold nights, when I see my breath in the air, I remember that other rhythm. That patient, steady breathing, keeping pace with mine. Waiting for me to turn my head, waiting to see what would happen if I finally stopped walking and stood still.